今天是马年新春的第一期节目，大家新年好。今天的访谈嘉宾一位是 Lucio Pitlo，Lucio 是菲律宾中国研究协会的主席，也是亚太进步之路基金会的研究员。另一位嘉宾是马来亚大学的副教授饶兆斌博士。今天呢，我们就和两位老朋友一起来聊一聊当前的南海和区域局势。
Morning.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to join the show. And I really wanted to, looking forward to talk with you of the current situation in the South China Sea and what to expect in the year of horse.
We see turbulence in the South China Sea in 2025, especially on黄岩岛, Gulf of Shore. And recently, there's a heated debate between Philippine Coast Guard spokesman Jay Tarriella and Chinese embassy in Manila. I noticed that some media call it war of words. How would you summarize the current state of the South China Sea situation and the China-Philippine relations?
Yeah, thank you again for the kind invitation. It's always a pleasure to join conversation with good friends. The issue of the South China Sea remains, of course, a deep and intractable row between the two sides. In the Philippine case, despite of the efforts of government not to allow the maritime road to be front and center of bilateral ties, we have seen in the last 3 years thus far, this is not the case because regrettably, the South China Sea row had dominated bilateral ties. We had seen much coverage of untoward encounters between the Coast Guards, the fishing and militia fleets of the two sides. Of course, that sowed more mistrust, and the public spat doesn't help. It only complicates diplomacy, and the so-called transparency initiative of the Philippines that tries to put the gray zone activities of China in the Philippines exclusive economic zone on the spot. But while it did raise national consciousness on the issue, it did not prevent untoward encounters. And of course, it did not help dial down tensions. And far from being deterred, in fact, China doubled down, adopted its own transparency initiative, and also promoted its own narrative. So in the ensuing clash between this megaphone diplomacy and the wolf warrior diplomacy, the actual diplomacy suffered the most. And this narrowing diplomatic space is affecting, of course, ties between the two neighbors. And this do not create a conducive environment to move forward with the much hoped conclusion for the Code of Conduct under Manila's chairmanship this year.
Yeah, thank you, Lucio. Well, Dr. Rao Zhaobin, what do you think the current status between China and the Philippines? And also, Lucio, when Lucio talked about the South China Sea, you said it's the Philippines EEZ, but in China, we think this is much of these waters are under China's jurisdiction because we have our claims, on the South China Sea since like many years ago. So how about Professor Yao? How do you see the current situation?
Thank you. Glad to be here, joining two old friends, good friends, Yan Yan and Lucio. We are talking about a heavy subject on the occasion of Chinese New Year. I hope that the spirit of the Chinese New Year will help us get through the heavy topic of the South China Sea dispute. I just heard Lucio's summarizing what happened between China and the Philippines in the past year. And it is fair to say that Malaysia would not like to see this confrontation between two neighbors and two partners of Malaysia getting more and more tense. It was something Malaysia definitely wishes that both China and the Philippines can work out their differences in a much more constructive and manageable way. And of course, China also has overlapping claims with Malaysia's waters. We also do not accept China's claim as legitimate. However, we do understand the complexity of the issue, and there are areas or operations from China's side that Malaysia would constantly send diplomatic notes to register our disapproval of certain actions coming from China's side. But on the other hand, we understand that this is again something Lucio mentioned. This is not the sum of all the bilateral relationship. while we have our differences with China, Malaysia has tried another approach in a way, trying to foster more collaboration, partnership in areas where we can work together. And of course, the South China Sea, we are constantly watching or constantly observing. We are vigilant, but we don't have to escalate the situation beyond what it already is. So I think, and fortunately, I think from the China side, there is also the intention not to escalate anything beyond what is already there. So I think on this basis, Malaysia and China can maintain some sort of control and manage approach towards their differences while developing other areas in the relationship where they can develop their relationship. Right. So I'm happy to share more, but I will just stop here for now.
Thank you. And also, I do see that there are several search and rescue cases in the past 2 months. Both Chinese Navy and Chinese Coast Guard rescue Philippine fishermen and also the crews, like 17 of them. So I'm just curious, what are the comments in the Philippines domestically? And do you think it helps, these search and rescue cases helps to de-escalate the tension, Lucio?
Well, correct. I think those acts of humanitarian assistance in times of distress, last January, last month, there was this China Coast Guard operation to rescue 17 Filipino crew of a ship that accidentally sank near Scarborough Shoal. So that effort was appreciated here, including the Philippine Coast Guard that sent, of course, heartfelt thanks, to the effort professional made by CCG people. So I think these kinds of activities help show that the South China Sea is not just all run-ins and untoward encounters. There are also acts of kindness that transcends nationalities in times of disasters. And I think these are the kind of stories that should be magnified. And I think these are the kind of encounters that will help improve trust and open more spaces for dialogue between the two sides.
That's my hope too. That's my sincere hope too. But also, I think that in the year 2026, it's my personal thinking that Scarborough Offshore will probably continue to be the focus of tension in this coming new year. What do you think? Because you see China establish a natural reserve in the Scarborough Offshore area. And also, at the same time, the Philippines currently announced a military joint exercises area with the United States around Scarborough Offshore sea area. So do you think the Scarborough Offshore will continue to be the focus of tension in the new year?
Well, I think so because of as you mentioned, the declaration of China turning this shoal into a marine sanctuary, that of course raised a lot of concern on the part of the Philippines. Manila filed a diplomatic protest about this development. And of course, local fisherfolk frequent this rich fishing ground are concerned about potentially being deprived of access to this area. And of course, this would undermine the Philippines' position and claim over this shoal. And I think Philippines' position is that any construction in the shoal would be seen as unfriendly and a red line. I think this had been communicated to China before. And so I suspect that developments in Scarborough Shoal will continue to be a challenge between the two sides this year.
You see, China's stance towards the Scarborough Shoal is quite firm, and we think that it is our jurisdiction and our sovereignty to establish a natural reserve on this shore. But also that talking about normal fishermen, like the Filipino fishermen, well, actually, China does allow these fishermen to fish around Scarborough Shore water area due to humanitarian reasons. So after 2016, so that there are so much operations organized by the Philippines Coast Guard, like 10 and 12, more than 10 vessels to conduct operations to so-called, helping the fishermen on the area. We think that it's just more like a show, to exercise your claim of jurisdiction over there. And that's what Chinese think is the cause of the current friction. So Professor Yao, do you think the Scope offshore will continue to be the hot spot, in the new year?
Well, unfortunately, I think the tensions will likely persist, even though I kind of feel that the Philippines and China also are now trying to work out a more manageable way to deal with their own differences. I read from the news reports, that early January they have a meeting in Cebu, in the Philippines Islands, and where supposedly a roadmap towards managing their differences is being discussed, and I will only have the best wish that this roadmap can lead to somewhere. Tensions between China and the Philippines will not directly impact how Malaysia deal with the differences with China, but it will sort of generally raise the kind of anxieties in the region. Of course, between Malaysia and China, the most for Philippines is the Scarborough Shoal and Second Tomo Shoal, and a number of other features as well. But between China and Malaysia is the Bukano Shoals, where we also have episodes of standoff, of mutual observations, and from time to time a little bit of tensions here and there. But so far, fortunately, there have not been any serious untoward incidents, and Malaysia would like to keep it that way. Nevertheless, I have to say that given the general situation in the South China Sea, partly driven by the dispute between China and the Philippines, and also more and more external power, what we call external power sometimes, are becoming more involved in the region. And also China is generally not necessarily showing any signs of having a more flexible approach. Malaysia is also getting more concerned. I want to bring to you, to the audience here, one attention that last year, Malaysian Ministry of Defense conducted what they call the midterm review of the defense white paper, which was published, I think, in late 2019 and early 2020. It was a kind of a long-term defense reform or defense modernization planning for the Malaysian government, and the government was putting the implementation of the white paper very seriously. And last year they conducted a review, and in the review document, it was only issued in Malay language, not available in English yet. But in that document, it was putting a lot more emphasis on the situation in the South China Sea, on certain activities, gray zone activities. It did not name any particular China, but I think the reference point is quite clear. It was having the whole document, the midterm review document, was showing a lot more signs of anxiety. And I think China, other countries, should take note of this, that Malaysia, despite generally having a more moderate or so-called low-profile approach, it is not necessarily very quiet in a way. It's not necessarily not being affected by what is going on there. Right, so that is my take.
Yes, you remind me of this Munich security conference, which started right today in Germany. And I remember this year's Munich security conference report saying that this current world order and the rules and the so-called rules-based order is collapsing. So the European countries are really worried, and they bring together all the security analysts and these government leaders to talk about how to reconstruct a new world order and how to unify these European countries to survive in this crisis world. Lucio and also Professor Yao, how do you see the external power in the South China Sea? We see that the Philippines, just now we already mentioned that the Philippines is conducting more military exercises with the United States. And we also see some other European countries and also like Japan and Asia countries also enhance their military ties and defense ties with some claimant states. How do you evaluate the current situation with the external powers?
Yes, the Philippines in the last few years had been trying to expand its pool of security partners. I think the trend of diversification does not only apply to economics, but also very much to security, largely in part to concerns about, U.S. security commitments, perhaps the concern that it may decide to focus more on the Western Hemisphere, and at the same time of concerns about developments in other areas, from Venezuela to Greenland, which may affect the European focus in away from perhaps in the Pacific to move closer to home, in support of Denmark in relation to US designs over Greenland. So perhaps the bandwidth of, France, Germany, other countries in Europe, which is trying to reach out to partners in the Indo-Pacific or Asia might be affected by this, recent development. So, but just the same, the Philippines signed visiting forces agreement with New Zealand and Canada last year. It also expanded maritime drills with Australia. And I think there's some negotiation with France or even South Korea for a similar bilateral drills, military exercises. And then, of course, a reciprocal access agreement with Japan and subsequently an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement with Tokyo was reached last January. And so I think this would increase the security profile of Japan in the Philippines, as well as I think Malaysia also is one of the beneficiaries of Japan's official security assistance. So Japan's role in capacity building for coast guards and maritime law enforcement agencies in the region is growing. And so the Philippines is riding on it, given the country's own limited fiscal space to modernize its Coast Guard as well as its military. And so I think that this kind of development, these kinds of dynamic will continue because the Philippines is trying to ensure that it will not be too reliant on one or a limited pool of partners to defend itself and to be able to modernize its military to meet the challenges of the times, including governing or securing its vast maritime domain and responding to natural disasters or other contingencies.
Yeah, I think that's my main concern in the year 2026. Like on the one hand, the security landscape in the South China Sea will be more complicated with more powers, more forces involving in these security issues in the region. And then also I see the Philippines, you see you have closer ties with Japan and also with Taiwan, Chinese Taipei. So I think that probably this South China Sea tension and also the East China Sea dispute between China and Japan and also our cross-strait relations will be also affected by this and also intertwined with the South China Sea situation. So things will be more complicated in this coming new year. So Professor Yao, how do you think of this?
I think in that sense, actually, Malaysia is, I would say, somewhat similar to what the Philippines is also exploring, which is basically expanding the range of partnerships. And when we talk about external powers, in a way, they are geographically external powers, but we don't really look the government or the Malaysian decision maker don't really look at these external powers as somewhat being so-called external. They have a very strong and legitimate role to play in the region. And sometimes it is the countries in the region that welcome partnerships with these so-called external partners. For Malaysia, I just want to point out several trends in 2025 that will have implications in the subsequent years. And then I think the first is actually the Malaysia-US relationship is actually very robust. Sometimes it's more robust than what people perceive it to be because the headlines generally is how China and Malaysia have very cordial ties or the mutual visits, top-level visits, Prime Minister Anwar's visit to China or President Xi Jinping visit to Malaysia, and so on and so forth. But especially the security relationship between Malaysia and the US is very, very strongly founded, very robust. In 2025, there are two agreements. One is actually a renewal of the agreement, which is the acquisition and cross-servicing agreement. And then there is a MOU on defense cooperation. First time it's signed with the United States. And then last year, Malaysia-US upgraded their relationship to comprehensive strategic partnership. Same with some other countries, including with China. Although with China, we also added the Community with a Shared Future label to it. And then also in 2025, when President Trump visited Malaysia, there was an agreement of reciprocal trade. It is a trade deal. And then there was a MOU on critical minerals. All these developments suggest that Malaysia's partnership with the US is actually quite robust, quite strong across different areas. And we have also reached out to many other countries. Partnership with Japan and India, Australia is very strong. And for one final point, one of the key pillars of Malaysia's security policy is the Five Powers Defense Arrangement, FPDA. I don't think FPDA is understood, especially among China analysts. So far, there has been relatively little attention being paid to FPDA because the FPDA basically the areas is basically more confined to the Malay Peninsula or the West Malaysia part. But there are indications, tentative, it's not conclusive, it's not for sure, but there are tentative indications that there are certain directions to expand PDA towards what we call East Malaysia, which face the South China Sea. And that will be will be a very significant development if that happens. There is no official sign or official direction, but you can kind of read this, especially in the midterm review of the Defense White Paper document, that show that there are certain indications of that one. So all this are basically showing also that Malaysia is partnering with various countries outside of the region to increase its own defense capabilities and posture in case of anything unfortunate that will happen.
It seems that Malaysia wants to keep a balance, between China and the United States and doesn't want to choose sides and very carefully, choosing the way. And talking about the United States and world crisis, some analysts think that the United States, the President Trump's focus is currently on Greenland, on Middle East with Iran, with Israel, and the South China Sea is even not on top 3 of his security and foreign policy priority. So what do you think of this? Do you think the United States will really come to help to the Philippines, under this 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, or it just does not really want to see any serious crisis or war in the South China Sea?
Well, yes, so far the Greenland issue is getting much coverage. The concern on Iran, given the buildup of U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf in that area, is another immediate cause of concern. And of course, President Trump there are reports that he will visit Beijing in April. And so I think both sides, U.S. and China, would want to manage this very important bilateral relations. And of course, among the issues that will be covered will include flashpoints in the region, but we still don't know to what extent they would be up in the priority list, given the myriad of differences the two powers have, from trade to technology to Ukraine to flashpoints in the region like Taiwan and the South China Sea. But which order would be the first short list? And of course, countries in the region are also a bit wary. This great power deal that may blindside or marginalize allies and partners. And I think this is where the diversification of partners from trade to security is seen as imperative, to hedge or to have some kind of insurance to make sure that in all possible outcomes, the interests of the country would be best served, or risks would at least be mitigated.
Well, talking about solving the dispute, I think even though the United States is already a player in the South China Sea, in this playground, it has so much influence in the regional countries, especially through the security ties. And however, I think if we wanted to solve the dispute, still we need to rely on ourselves, like the claim states ourselves. So how do you evaluate the current dialogue mechanism, or for example, the BCM, the bilateral consultative mechanism between China and the Philippines, and also this bilateral dialogue mechanism between China and Malaysia on maritime issues? So how do you evaluate these bilateral talks and dialogues? Lucio?
I think for the Philippines-China bilateral consultation mechanism, it's I think by far the only visible, out there platform for dialogue between the two sides. Regrettably, the hotlines between the Coast Guards, the navies, the security talks that before were periodic. Even Philippines skipped the 19th Western Pacific Naval Symposium held in Qingdao, and was absent in most recent rounds of the Beijing Xiangshan Forum. So I think the platforms for security and diplomatic dialogues are far in between the two sides. And so I think the BCM remains one of the more durable, despite of the transition from the previous, the governments of Duterte and the current Marcos administration. This mechanism is still out there. There had been proposals to create alternative channels like a foreign ministry hotline and even a presidential hotline, but we have not heard much from them since. So last January 29, there was a meeting between the diplomats of the Philippines and China in Cebu, and that came ahead of the ASEAN-China senior officials meeting, I think, on the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea. So I think it's a good sign. It's a welcome development. But again, these meetings are sparse. And considering the uptick in untoward encounters between the two sides and the rising tensions, I think there's a need for more to avoid miscalculation and for both sides to communicate their interests, the areas where perhaps they may be willing to negotiate or compromise, but as well as the areas where they think they really have to draw some lines and tell that any attempt to cross this would be seen as very unfriendly and should be discouraged. So I think there should be more dialogue. And last year, Xiamen hosted a 10th bilateral consultation mechanism. This year, of course, there was a meeting in Cebu. Hopefully, there would be more meeting. So the BCM has been by far like once or twice a year. I think that's too short, too limited, given the increasingly risky encounters in the South China Sea and the need for both sides to stabilize relations. I think there should be more.
I remember that under President Duterte's government, the two Coast Guards established a committee, like joint committee, and then we exchanged visits to each other's ports. And also, I remember that it was in early 2020, the Chinese Coast Guard visited the ports in Manila before the pandemic. So I really hope that this kind of a joint committee and this mechanism can go on, under this supervision of this central government. So, Professor Yao?
It's fair to say that the idea of bilateral maritime dialogue, especially concerning the South China Sea, was actually not very well received in the diplomatic establishment in the government. Actually, the Malaysia-China bilateral dialogue or BCM, well, if we follow the history of it, is already somewhat agreed upon pre-pandemic. But then, for various reasons, Malaysia never really wanted to follow up, exactly because there was a lot of different opinions within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that suggest that we should not, or Malaysia should not continue this path. However, under the leadership of the current Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, as well as some of his very core officials, that idea was basically revived and put into practice. So up until today, there were two meetings under this particular mechanism. From the Malaysia side, the leading agency is actually National Security Council rather than the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That actually showed that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, even though they were informed and they will probably have some role in it, but they were not the lead agency, and there were some ideas of as I said, there are some resistance about this idea. I think the biggest concern for Malaysia is that that will legitimize certain claims that Malaysia's official position is that they don't recognize there is any legitimate claim from China. So the PCM supposedly, let me rephrase, those who are concerned about it with that the PCM will lead to some sort of concession on Malaysian part about this one. So far, our official hasn't really changed. The PCM hasn't really resulted in any official change of our official stance. And interestingly, the PCM, the team from both sides, as I observe, is not just about the foreign policy people in the government. They include some of the trade people, and if I remember correctly, also some of the environment agency people participating. That shows that the PCM that Malaysia and China want to design is not just about trying to discuss the dispute, and maybe not, maybe that issue is not the whole discussion topic as well. Maybe it's just actually more about trying to find ways to collaborate on certain common interest issues. So that is something that I would say both countries will continue to have some incentives with this particular format.
Yes, my understanding of this China-Malaysia platform is that it's not solely for the South China Sea. It's not just discussing the South China Sea dispute, but it's like we can discuss on this platform on a more broader maritime issues, like even including maritime economy and everything. So I really
Yes,
hope that
exactly.
this will. Yes, I hope that this will be functioning, in the coming new year. So talking about the Philippines being the chair of the ASEAN chairmanship in the year 2026, Lucio, I wanted to ask, does the Philippines has any plans or any aims to achieve in this coming year?
I think that the expectation that the Philippines will try to do its best to conclude the code of conduct this year. I think there's a lot of desire, resolve on the part of Manila to get this done, with the hope that this document will help prevent further untoward encounters in the South China Sea and help improve stability in this area. At the same time, help stabilize, the fraying ties between the Philippines and China, which is largely tied to what is going on in the South China Sea. At the same time, I think there are other deliverables, especially on the economic front, that the Philippines will try to accomplish, given, of course, what Malaysia under its chairmanship last year did on the trade front by upgrading the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement to cover green and digital economies and support for micro and small and medium enterprises. I think this year, the Philippines will, ASEAN chair, try to finalize the ASEAN-Canada FTA. I think Prime Minister Carney, in his speech in Davos, also mentioned about Canada's ongoing trade diversification, part of which includes signing FTA deals with ASEAN, as well as a bilateral one with the Philippines. And so I think the Philippines will try to leverage its position as chair of ASEAN to conclude, hopefully, a favorable FTA with an important trade partner for ASEAN while negotiating its own bilateral FTA with Ottawa. And other items that are, in my view, low-hanging fruits is the Digital Economy Framework Agreement. I think this is an area that the Philippines can work on, given the burgeoning digital economy, not only in the Philippines, but also in ASEAN, with a very young demography and, of course, a lot of demand for connectivity to the internet and, of course, the emerging technologies that can be spurred by having a regulation that will allow for the growth of these industries and at the same time develop robust capacity to secure, the cyberspace as well as, critical infrastructure related to the digital economy. So I think these are some of the points that the Philippines will try to secure in its chairmanship over both, the COC, I think will be very high in the agenda. But I think Philippines will be well advised to also look into accomplishing other items, including in the technology and trade front, as well as perhaps making sure that ASEAN voices on the issue of AI and our other emerging technologies, the conversation in terms of shaping norms and standards on this, the input of developing countries like ASEAN will be heard and will be registered.
That the Philippines will be really busy in this year and there are much things to achieve. And talking about the COC, well, recently I've talked to some of my Southeast Asian friends, and I think that I heard more of pessimistic feelings towards the COC achievement than positive feelings towards it. So what to expect for the coming COC if we can conclude one? Well, people think that it might be just an upgraded DOC and not much things will be changed, but other peoples will still still rely on it, want to rely on it on crisis management. So do you think what can we expect from this coming COC?
Well, I actually would share the sentiment that the COC will be a rather soft COC if it is successfully concluded this year. Just for the very basic fact that based on available information, there don't seem to be any narrowing of the gap between the positions of the negotiating parties, particularly between China and the Philippines, but it's not the only one. I think between China and Vietnam, and there are other, a lot of these very, very fundamental positions. I'm not sure whether there is any narrowing of the gap between the negotiating parties. So they may have to come out with some sort of a very vague or general coverage so that the differences will sort of be, so that these differences will not be the sticking point, in the COC negotiation conclusion. So if there is a case, then I would say that it is still going to be a rather soft COC document. But I would say even if it is a soft one, we should not dismiss its importance. It is a very important step towards working some sort of a consensus. It is just a first step towards a very long process of finally finding some kind of sustainable solution to the South China Sea dispute. Right? Even if people criticize DOC a lot for being vague or being not specific enough, remember in the first couple of years after the DOC, the situation was actually quite stable. Countries were basically willing to work on the basis of what the DOC had promised. I think we got the lessons of the DOC, and then the COC could probably, even if it's soft version, probably will provide a stronger foundation for something that can move countries towards something more sustainable in the years to come.
Yes, still we have something to look forward to, Lucio. And also I wanted to ask that I personally feel that in this coming year, I think that for security issues, there are still many challenges ahead for us to solve. And also, but at the same time, for economic and technology issues, there's something that we can look forward to. Maybe you two experts can give us some final words on the year of this coming new year of the horse.
I think reaching consensus on the COC remains a challenge. As mentioned by Dr. Choping, I think the contentious points, getting an agreement on them, even within the ASEAN coastal states, is not easy. But we all know that a lot of things have changed since the DOC of 2002. So the expectation is that the document that would be arrived at, the COC, should have more binding, more stronger effect than the DOC to cover for these developments and, of course, to forecast into the future. But I think this is where the contest between the feasible, the here and now, and the ideal, comes. So I think some parties will be more amenable, acceptable to a document that can be easily arrived at versus a document that is very, very ideal but may take more years to generate. And so I think this is part of the risk that the Philippines may assume if it will anchor its chairmanship in concluding the COC. So that aside, I think apart from the COC, we mentioned that the Philippines, under its chairmanship, the team is navigating, sailing together. And of course, that means that factoring the priorities, interests of its fellow members in ASEAN. So that means not only the South China Sea, but also very much the issue of Myanmar. President Marcos appointed our Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Maria Teresa Lazaro, to be the special envoy of the chair to find a way to promote or facilitate dialogue to end the crisis in Myanmar. Of course, that's not easy under the 5-point consensus. And at the same time, hopefully, of course, underwhelming expectations, but for Philippines as chair of ASEAN to continue to work with the rest of ASEAN and other major partners like US and China to support the fledgling peace between Thailand and Cambodia, given their borders path, making sure that the path to normalization will be sustained. And then apart from that, the trade we mentioned earlier, ASEAN's effort to diversify its trade partners remain as the central actor in the evolving trade architecture. Of course, there is the concern that U.S., one of the region's key investors and trade partners, is putting more preference, more premium to bilateral trade deals than multilaterally negotiated trade deals. So there is that concern. So the fear that negotiating with the U.S. on a one-by-one basis may diminish the bargaining weight of individual ASEAN states compared to ASEAN 7 member states to negotiate as a whole, with partners, whether with China, with Australia, with Canada, with Japan, or in this case with the U.S. But U.S. doesn't seem to have that appetite for larger free trade deals, after withdrawing from TPP back in 2017. But you compare that with of course, the appetite of other trade partners like China, which is, of course, part of RCEP, and of course, the upgrade of ASEAN-China FTA, the first by ASEAN with external trade partner. And so I think the Philippines will try to take off from these endeavors and make sure that it will offer a comprehensive agenda that takes into consideration the interests, the comprehensive interests of all ASEAN members and partners.
Thank you. And also, any other final words, Professor Yao?
Yeah, just 2 points. Malaysia is the current country coordinating relations with China from among the ASEAN country. I never really get that term correct, but anyway, I think that role is also important. Together with Philippines as an ASEAN chair and Malaysia as a coordinating country role, whatever, together they could push forward the COC negotiation, accelerate the pace, make it more urgent, and try to get some sort of agreement towards the end of the year. That is the goal. We're not sure whether it can really get there, but at least there's some roles that Malaysia is happy to play and happy to support. The other point, Malaysia just chaired ASEAN chairmanship last year, followed by Philippines this year. Last year, Malaysia basically received a lot of positive praises or positive support from other countries, from ASEAN member states. Malaysia's basically, I think the main agenda is economic and trade, technology, ASEAN power grid, but did not manage to get the breakthroughs of certain very difficult or challenging geopolitical issues. And the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand came very unexpectedly. But fortunately, Malaysia did play a role in terms of getting both sides to a ceasefire, and hopefully they could sustain. Malaysia is confident that the Philippines this year will build on what Malaysia did last year, carry forward all the things that were established, and reinforce the importance of ASEAN, as a regional platform, magnify its importance, and became the relevant partner where functional solutions could come forward. In that sense, the Philippines definitely will have the strong support from Malaysia and I'm sure from other ASEAN member states as well.
Thank you. Well, it seems to me that even though there will be frictions between countries in the South China Sea, but still our regional states have this joint hope of establishing the stability and peace in the region. So let's look forward to it. Thank you to friends, to professors. And if you like our show, if you like our dialogue on maritime issues, you can follow us on YouTube. Thank you.